Today we've got myself and we've got David Crowfoot, who run the session last time. What we're going to do today, we're going to focus in on process mapping. So it's another one of the techniques within the Lean toolbox, which basically gets you to focus in on looking at the process. And it builds on what you did last time, which is identifying the waste within the process. So it's a way of, first of all, breaking the process down into lots and lots of individual stages and individual elements. But then at the same time as doing that, getting you to identify where the waste is. And this is then what we use then as the basis for working out what's the best way of improving the process, and then ultimately improving productivity of the operation as well. So that's what we're going to do as part of today. Just a bit of a reminder of the course itself and the objectives of what we're trying to do. So basically, we're going to try and get you to give you some practical hints and tips as to how you can carry out productivity improvements within your businesses. And what we're going to do is break that down today with a step-to-step guide on how to do a process map, then how you use the process map to identify the 7 ways plus 1, or 7 W's plus 1, which is what you covered last time with David. As always, we'll give you lots of examples from horticulture and agriculture. So we won't just give you the theory. We'll give you lots of examples and hopefully bring it to life. And we're going to make today, it's going to be lots of practical elements behind today. So Gracie sent out an email just reminding you to bring along post-it notes and flip chart paper. So hopefully you've got that to hand. And what we're going to get you to do is to actually produce or start to produce a process map with a view that then you go out and you do one within the business environment. So the key theme of what we're always trying to do, not only are we trying to give you the theory, we're trying to link that to a practical activity as quick as possible and get you out there doing it within a real world environment, so you can test out what you've learned and test out what you understand. So basically, what we've covered so far, first presentation was a bit of an overview of what Lean is. So we give you a little bit of background as to the theory. What David went through last time was the how to identify an improvement area and then how to identify a waste within an improvement area. And then what we're going to be doing today is the next level of detail, which is how you go about doing a process map using post-it notes. So that's where we are in the larger scheme of the actual delivery of the program itself. So today's session, we'll have a review of what we've covered so far in the course. We'll then get you to feedback to us on what you found when you started to do the waste identification within your own business. And then we'll get into the meat of today, which is the process map, how to produce a process map. And then we'll talk through how you can then go away and actually start applying that and give you an activity of going away and doing a process map on one of your areas that you've identified that you'd like to improve within your own business. So each of these training courses and these modules that we run will get you to build on what we've covered last time. So as you attend and as you do more of the activities, we're going to actually take you through step by step by doing a productivity improvement within your own business, which is that links back to the overall of what we're trying to achieve. David, do you want to pick up and cover this bit, which is a summary of what you covered last time?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say hello everyone and happy new year. So this is what we went through last year. I know a lot of time has passed and hopefully a good Christmas break for everyone. So we talked about the 8 wastes. So I asked you to have a think about where you could find these 8 wastes within your process. So value is those process steps and activities that add value when the customer thinks it's worth value, it's done right first time, and it transforms the process or service. So we talked about things like the actual process of picking, the things like sticking, etc., and everything else is waste. And what we normally find is that 80 to 95% of lead time is usually waste activities. I think we've caveated that a few times particularly within agricultural. Some of those figures are slightly different. So I then presented you with Tim Wood for the 8 wastes. And the first being transport. I'll quickly go through these again. Transport, moving things around. Inventory or overstocking, that's work that we've done that sits around not finished or waiting to be sent. Movement of people is people moving around. Waitings or delays is when people, the product, resources, or anything else is waiting for the next thing to happen. There's two overs. Overproduction is doing too much, doing something that's not needed. Overprocessing is performing tasks that don't add value, so trying to add value. Defects is quality issues or activities that are not completed correctly. And then the final bolt-on was about skills and talents. So that was not appropriately utilizing the skills of your resource. So it was a quick fly through those 7 wastes, 7 plus 1. And again, on the principle that, on the principle that we should be able to see those wastes when we understand that the values are those things that are required by the customer. So I asked if you could go away, and I gave you a template, that template of the 7 wastes plus 1, and have a look at your target area for improvements to see if you could identify and see some waste. So when we discussed this, I understand that in some cases those areas weren't in production. So I suggested that either you think about that process or either look elsewhere and see if you can think about what wastes you might see.
Really, just building on that, what we're talking about with this session with process mapping, basically it just makes it a little bit easier to identify where that waste is. It just helps you to quantify it as well in terms of time and distance. So you know, quite often when you're trying to justify some improvement activity, it might be some expenditure that you want to justify. It just makes it easy to justify that expenditure because you'll be able to quantify how much time you lose with this particular waste that you've identified. So just as a reminder of what David covered in the first 2 sessions, these are the 5 basic principles of lean. We use process mapping as a way of understanding the value stream. So we understand how does the input come in terms of a customer inquiry for a product. How do you then transfer that through to growing the product? How do you then transfer that through to picking the product, to lifting the product, through to the packing process, and then through to the transportation process? So the process mapping technique is a way of visualizing this end-to-end value stream that you've got within a business. And as a means of doing that, and as an activity of understanding what this value stream is, we're going to get you to start identifying in a little bit more detail to what you've already started to do, what these 7 wastes are. And the theory is, if you can eliminate these 7 wastes plus 1, what it should allow you is to improve the flow of the product. So the plants, the fruits, whatever the value is that you're delivering to your end customers, by eliminating the waste, it's a bit like eliminating blockages in a stream. It'll allow you to flow the product through, which will hopefully improve productivity and also improve the service levels to your customers. So that's how this technique of process mapping fits in with the overall of what we're trying to achieve. Already covered this, so I'm not going into any detail on this one, but you know, essentially this is what we're trying to eliminate. Just a reminder, we're trying to eliminate this non-value add, these 7 wastes plus 1 or 8 wastes. That tends to be the vast majority. When you're doing your process mapping activity, the vast majority of activities that you'll identify, that you'll write down on the post-it notes, will be non-value added activities or waste. And that's where we focus our efforts. We focus our efforts on improving those ones and reducing down the amount of time that they take, or hopefully eliminating them completely. Because if we can do that, if we can eliminate those down, it'll increase the amount of capacity we've got for doing value-added activities. So that's the reason why we're doing what we're doing. You can see, just about see on the background here, this is your classic process map. I've got a better picture in a moment, but this is the mapping of an end-to-end process from start to finish. And this is where we've not only have we used it to identify your classic 7 wastes plus 1, which you see in operations, but we've also used it to identify problems in the office as well. So it might be that you know, there's batching of documents, so people holding on to information. It might be that people have got personal filing systems, so they've got their own way, their own knowledge stores. They're storing information and they're not releasing that information, which causes problems. It could be you have systems that don't talk to each other, so people are spending a lot of time entering information from one system to another system. You know, things like stock locations, for example. It could be that you can't predict how long it takes to do things within the process, which can cause problems. And what happens is these wastes, eventually they start to bottleneck up the process itself. And what people start to work out a way of fast tracking things through. So they tend to work out workarounds around the process. So by hopefully identifying these wastes, not only in the operational environment, but also in the office environments as well, it'll allow you to streamline the process and make the process run much more efficiently, and that value to flow more efficiently. So whenever we're doing any process mapping, not only do we consider the operation as well, but we also consider the offices, and we get those individuals involved as well. So everyone gets a really good understanding of what each other is trying to do within the process itself. Good. I think it's like David said before. You're trying to involve, and a few of you have already eliminated. You're waiting until people come back into the business before you start doing your process mapping or your waste analysis. You want to involve as many people as you possibly can. Because the last thing you want to do is improve one part of the process and cause chaos in another part of the process. So you want to do it in such a way that everybody benefits and not just one particular part of the business itself. I'm just going to give you an example. First of all, this is a case study within a business of what a process map is. So I'm always conscious of the fact that we explain to you and show you what a process map looks like. This is what we've done. I've picked this process because it's a really simple process, and it's one that hopefully everyone can relate to. It's a typical type of process that everybody can relate to, and it's within a garden centre, and it's basically the production of hot drinks within a garden centre. So it's how you make a cup of coffee within a garden centre. Now, the vast majority of sales that go on within garden centres is actually food and drink, and it's absolutely core to the business itself. Most people go to a garden centre for food and drinks. Therefore, if there's any delays within that process, it's delaying the customers going through the overall business process. So the problem that we had is, how do we reduce down the amount of time that people are queuing to get their hot drinks and pay for the hot food? Because we want them to have a good experience. We want them to get through the process, and on the way out, we want them to buy some plants as well at the same time. So any of you that work in horticulture, that supply plants to garden centres and are aware of what goes on in a garden centre, you're probably well aware of the fact that this is absolutely a crucial process. But what it does as well is it really demonstrates the technique for you, so you can actually see how this technique works. So this is your classic process map. So this is where we've broken down how to make a medium cappuccino. So this is the most common product that they sell within the canteen, within the cafe itself, is a medium cappuccino, which is why we picked it. So a key learning point is when you're process mapping, pick something that's what we call a runner. Quite a considerable amount of volume goes through the operation for this particular product. So in this instance, we picked a cappuccino, and then what you've got here is all the steps broken down, what's involved in actually making this cappuccino. So you've got the customer queuing, you've got the greeter meeting at the till itself and taking the order, heating and preparing the cappuccino itself, so getting the cup warmed, getting the milk ready, putting the coffee shots in, heating the milk, building the drink itself, delivering it to the coffee point, serving the customer, and then taking payment. So that whole process takes 4 minutes and 23 seconds. And within that, 38 seconds of it is actually value add. So that's where you're actually talking to the customer and you're interacting with the customer. The rest of the time is non-value add, because basically you turn your back on your customer at that point and you're actually preparing the product. And the customer doesn't want to hanging around. They want to get their coffee as quick as possible and then move through and sit down and actually enjoy the coffee. So the more you can do to eliminate this non-value add, not only are you going to get the customers through quicker, but you're also going to improve the experience of the customer itself. So this is your classic process map. We've broken it down, all the steps involved in doing a particular activity. This is what we do at the same time. So what we normally do, and whenever we're doing a process map, we produce what's called a string diagram. And what this shows is this is the layout of the hot drinks counter itself. So this is the where the customer moves at the front of the counter. This is behind the counter where they actually build the drinks. So basically, you've got the sequence of steps where you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's the actual route that they take, and this is matches up with what we've done in the process map as well. So you can actually see the distances and the journey that the individual's doing at the same time as the process map. Straight away, what's some of the problems that you can see?
Too much moving about.
Yeah, exactly, straight away. And especially, you know, when you've got this movement of backwards and forwards, especially imagine you've got multiple people working in this particular area where you've got people walking backwards and forwards. You know, and relate this back to your own processes. This might be a conveyor belt where you're doing packing. This could be a cleaning station, could be a weighing station in soft fruits. So it could be any operation. And by analysing the movement that the individual's doing and the time that they're taking on the process map and breaking it down, you start to be able to see where the big issues are. And so the waste that we've asked you to identify, by going into this level of detail and understanding the process and these, break it down into these individual steps, it makes it much easier for you to see where the problems are within the process. And by doing it as a group, by getting a group of you to do this together and to understand these steps together, everybody starts to agree where the problems are, and then everybody can start to agree what the answers are to fixing these particular problems. So when they did this, did it as a group. They involved several people, including the managers, and basically they got everyone's input as to what the problems were and what the issues were. And then what they started to think about is how could they relay out this new process? How could they relay out the hot drinks counter? And as you can see, comparing the before and the after, what they've done is they've improved the flow of the operator and of the person actually making the drinks. They've made it much smoother. They've reorganised the sequence of the way they do things. They haven't got people going backwards and forwards and banging into each other and a little bit of chaos associated with that. They've made it much smoother for the operation itself. So they've used it to work out what's the best way of relaying out this process. So those of you that were thinking about new process areas and relaying out areas, this is a really good way of doing it to identify what's the best layout in order to reduce down the amount of waste within the process itself. And then what they've done is they've gone back and they've carried out the value stream mapping activity, the process mapping activity. So they've gone back and they've remeasured as part of the trial all the times taken to do each of the different elements of the operation itself. And you can see they've had a big impact on reducing down the amount of queuing time, which is massive non-value add from a customer's point of view, and improved the amount of lead time it takes to actually make the cappuccino, as well as improving the productivity of the individuals. So they've taken that time, before was 4 minutes and 23 seconds, and they've reduced that down to 1 minute and 14 seconds. So they've improved the flow of the customer by eliminating the waste. They've improved the productivity, so they've increased the amount of capacity that they've got within the operation. And then the big impact of what they did was the increased sales that they got from the site. So not only did they manage to increase sales of food and drink, but because they were improving the footfall of customers going through the garden centre, it had quite a big increase in sales across the garden centre as well. And then what they did then is they then took that and applied that to the rest of the business. So they did it in one area. They proved that it worked. They proved that the new way of working was a better way of working, the new layout. And then what they said is, right, now let's now replicate this across the rest of all the businesses. So not just one garden centre, but all the garden centres that we operate. And that's the normally when we're doing any improvements in lean. Normally what we try to do is do improvements in one area of the business and get it right and work out what's the best way of getting it to operate and the process to function. And then once you've made all your mistakes and you've worked out the way that you want it to work and what the ideal process looks like, then start to think about how you scale it up and ramp this up across the rest of the business. So I wanted to start off with a real simple example of what a process map looks like. So this idea of mapping out all the different stages of a process and getting you to think about the distance and the time that's involved in each of these particular steps. And what I'm going to take you through now is step by step, is guiding you through how you produce this and then getting you think about how you apply it to your own individual businesses. So this is a real world scenario again. So this is we're inside a large retailer. So we've mapped out the full end-to-end of the process from a gap on the shelf through to identifying what products selling, what products not selling, what availability there is with the supplier, checking to see whether the supplier can supply the product, then organising for the logistics company to collect the product from the supplier, and then finally to deliver the product to the end customer. So we've mapped it out from start to finish, end to end. So process maps, left to right, start the process, end of the process. What we've also started to do when we've been doing this is started to get to identify all the problems. So the 7 ways plus 1. So we're starting to identify when there's any bottlenecks or any blockages or production of reports that nobody reads, or where you've got too much movement or people waiting for bits of information. So that's where we've started to identify all the problems. And we're also starting to get people to identify what the opportunities are for improving it as well. So we had something like about 12 people in this particular process mapping activity. So by doing it together as a group, you know, everyone could share their ideas and what they thought their problems were within the process, and then everybody could agree what the action plan was going to be to improve the overall process. Because as I said earlier, what you don't want to do is make an improvement at the front end and cause chaos at the back end of the process. And quite often what you find is that people that work at the front end or people that work at the back end don't understand what each other does within the process itself. You know, so people who work in the picking teams might not necessarily understand what goes on in the pack house, and vice versa. So by getting everybody involved in doing the process mapping together, everyone starts to get a really good understanding of what each other is doing and what problems that they're actually encountering within the process itself. So by identifying what the process steps are, which is the yellow post-it notes, and then what all the ideas are, and all the 7 ways plus 1 is, we come up with one view of the process and hopefully one agreed plan on what you can do to actually improve it. What we've done on here as well is these pictures that you can see. These are just screen prints of all the various IT systems that they had. And what we were doing, we were printing out the screen prints so we could show what information was being input into the IT systems. You know, things like stock availability, loading of logistics, so loading lorries and load sheets for transportation. So all the documentation that was used within the process as well, we printed it out and we stuck it up onto the process map, so everyone got a really good understanding of what the data input was throughout the whole process, and we could start to see whether the same bit of information was being entered in multiple times throughout the process itself. So that's just an example of an end-to-end process map. So that's quite a large example, but hopefully what it demonstrates, you know, the start to finish of the process and how this is like a working document. It's a live document that you get several people involved in populating so that you can capture as many ideas as possible from the people that work within the process. So step by step, this is just, and we're going to give you a printout of this as well. So we've actually got this on a Word document. So it's like a standard operation really on how to produce a process map. So first thing, you've already started to do this, is identify why do you want to do the improvements itself. You know, is it to improve productivity? Do you want to reduce down the amount of lead time? Is it an issue of quality between the picking and the pack house? So first of all, just write down what it is that you want to achieve from this particular productivity or process map activity that you're going to be doing. The second thing, or step one, is to identify the start and the finish of the process itself. So that way you know where you're going to start off the activity and what the end of the activity is. Because if you don't do that, it's very, very easy to start process mapping the whole business itself. So by having this start and the finish, it gives you the start of your backbone of the process. But equally, you've got to be prepared to extend it. So it might well be that once you start getting into the process mapping activity, you start to find there's things that are coming out of this. So you might have to find you have to extend where you actually start the process. You might have to bring it into the offices, as I mentioned earlier, and do more process mapping in the offices rather than just the operation side of the business itself. Step two, identify who's going to be your team. So you may want suppliers involved. You definitely want people that work with you in the process, or people that really understand the detail of the process itself. You might want people that work in different departments. So people that represent purchasing, people that represent picking, people that represent packing, people responsible for logistics. So movement of the product around the nursery itself. So you want to try and get a selection of people that are a cross selection of people that work all the way across the process, so that everyone can represent the kind of problems that you have within the process itself. Step three, and this is normally all done in a room, is to identify what the main steps are within the process itself. So just while you're in a room together with those individuals that are part of the team, just identify what are the main steps within the process. And as I mentioned earlier, what I tend to do is get post-it notes, and I record down on post-it notes description of what the activity is, rough idea of the distance, so what sort of distance is involved and how long it takes to do that particular activity. So to start off with, all you're doing is you're just doing this in a room together, and you're just getting down the main steps and just getting estimates of distance and time. Once you've got your main steps, then normally what I do is I walk through the process with the team. So we'll walk it through from start to finish. So we'll be able to, that way we can visualize it and everyone understands what it is that we're going to be focusing in on. So I'll just do a quick walk through the process itself, just to make sure everyone's aware of what those key stages are that you've identified in step three. And then step five, normally what I do is I have, you're going to prepare yourselves now to actually do the process map. So I have one person who writes down on post-it notes. I have one person who records all the times involved in doing the activity. One person who's going to stride out and measure the distance. And normally all I do is one big stride is 1 metre. So as you're actually walking through the process, they're actually striding out and counting the number of steps that they're doing as part of the process itself. And then one person to do the activity. So whether that's actually picking or actually doing the packing, or producing a pick list or a lifting report, whatever it is, the activity it is that you're following, you get that individual to carry out the activity whilst the others observe, and they basically record down the distances and the times. And then everyone else that's involved within the team is identifying the waste. So those 7 waste plus 1 that we've talked about, as you're actually following through the process, you're basically recording down any waste that you see, any too much movement, too much waiting, any rework activities where you've got defects. They're making a list of all the problems that they see as they actually physically walk through the process. And then basically you just carry on repeating this. So you repeat this, and by recording down each individual step, and as many steps as you possibly can identify, you record them down on post-it notes, and you start off at the start of the process and work your way through to the end of the process. It should take you about 3 to 4 hours to do this properly. It should take you about 3 to 4 hours to do this step 6. You know, you won't want it to go on much longer than that. You know, you actually want to spend some time actually thinking about what you can do to improve it. But equally, you want to spend enough time doing it that you can actually start to identify what the key wastes are within the process itself. And as I said, you're recording these down on post-it notes, and recording down the post-it note description, the distance, and the time, and then sticking that up onto a piece of brown paper or a piece of white paper. I used to use wallpaper, so the back of wallpaper, put that up on the wall, and then stick all the post-it notes up on the process map. So you've got a really good visualization of what the end-to-end process looks like. And then you record it. So what you should end up with is something like this. So by the time you finish, that diagram I showed you earlier, so you've got yellow post-it notes all the way through. Normally what I do as well, really good thing to do, especially now everyone's got mobile phones, is take photographs of the waste as you go through it. So you've got a visual record of what the problems are. As mentioned earlier about printing out screen prints, any labels, any documentation, the pictures of the waste that you've taken photographs as you go through this, and stick them up on the process map as well. So this becomes like a working document. It becomes a live record of what you've found within the process itself. And then you can start to work from left to right on what each of the process stages are. I normally do it in the middle of the paper as much as I possibly can do. And in that way, then you can stick either side of the process map above and below. You can put on there the things that you're identifying as you go through it. So the waste that you're starting to identify, or the documentation that you're using as part of the process, you use as part of the process as well. Then as a group, just walk your way through it on the process map. Work your way through, reading each of the process notes, just making sure that you've covered everything and there's no gaps. It might well be that you realise at this stage that you've missed something out. There's additional processes that you've missed out on, and you might have to go back and just finish off getting that deep bit of detail that you're missing. So you know, you might find it takes a few iterations of doing this until you're happy with it, until you're completely happy with it. And then once you're happy, you've captured all the yellow post-it notes, all the individual steps. What I start to do then is write down all the waste post-it notes. So the 7 waste plus 1 that you've identified, I write them down on green post-it notes and then stick them on the process map as whereabouts they've occurred. So you can start to see which parts of the process have got lots of green post-it notes and therefore lots of waste associated with them. And that will start to give you some clues as to whereabouts you need to focus your improvement activities. If you've got a part of the process that's got lots of green post-it notes on it, you know there might be a problem there, or in the stages just before it, there might be some issues in the stages just before it. So it'll give you some clues as to where you need to start focusing your efforts and your improvement activities. So that's the next stage, is to record down all the waste onto green post-it notes and then stick them on top of the process map. You can see this picture at the bottom here. This is where the group's reviewing it together. They've put it up on the wall of the office, and they're working through and making sure they've covered everything off, and briefing other people that possibly weren't involved in the process map as well and getting their input. Next, 18 is record down any ideas that you might have. So you've identified all the steps, which go on yellow post-it notes. You've identified all the wastes, which go on green post-it notes. The next stage is to identify any ideas that you might have. And I usually put them on orange post-it notes. So any ideas that you've got about how to improve the process. Normally what you find is the orange post-it notes are ways of eliminating the waste. So by keeping the two activities separate, you first of all spend some time identifying the problems, and then your next stage is to think about what ideas you've got about how to improve it. So the orange post-it notes are ways of actually improving the operation and reducing down the amount of waste within the operation itself. And then step 16, what I start to think about, and I usually convert some of the yellow post-it notes into pink ones, which are the value add steps. So you think back to that one when we were making a cappuccino, the value add steps are the bits that the customer are willing to pay for. So that's when they actually get the coffee and where they interact with the person that's serving them. So think about within your process, which bits are the bits that really add value that the customer is willing to pay for. So that might be things like picking the fruit and putting it into the final punnet, into the final tray that the product gets sold in, or putting a label, the customer care label, onto the product itself. You know, it's things like that that add value. So by converting and identifying these steps, you're identifying which are the things that you do that the customer really values, is willing to pay for. And then final step is just really a review. It's just involving people, involving suppliers, involving customers potentially. So it might well be that they might be interested and may be able to do something to help improve the process as well. So just trying to involve as many people as possible within the activity of identifying what the problems are and then what can be done to actually improve this particular process. Okay, so this is what's involved step by step, how we actually go about producing a process map. So those ones that we covered off at the start on actually making a cappuccino. Is there any questions, first of all, before I move on to the next bit? Has anyone got any questions about what we've just covered, about how you actually go about doing these process mapping activities? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to send this out to you and we're going to get you between now and the next time we get together. And I want you to have a bash at actually doing a process map using this step-by-step guide within your own business. But has anyone got any questions at this stage? What we're going to give you opportunities to have a bash at starting this is just starting off the initial stages of doing a process map. So what I want you to do is think about the target areas that you've started to identify, and in the room together, just write down on post-it notes what the key stages are within the process itself. So just write down what are the key steps. You know, don't go any more than sort of like 20 post-it notes at this stage. Just write down what's the start and the finish of the process and what are some of the key stages within that process itself. Because then what we're going to get you to do between now and next time is actually to go out into the process and actually physically follow it through and actually record down distances and times. So at this stage, what you could do is just write down what the key stages are within the process and put them onto post-it notes and then put that onto a flip chart. If you manage to do really well and you manage to do that very quickly, use a different coloured post-it notes. If you can start to identify some of the 7 ways plus 1 that we've talked about that you know occur within the process, and write them down on separate post-it notes, an individual post-it note for each waste that you can identify, and stick that on the process map as well. What I'd like you to do is just expand upon this. We're going to send this presentation out. What I would like you to do is to work through the step-by-step guide that we've given you and actually start working on producing a full process map. Now, I guess the problem you're going to have, if you're going to have to pick a process that you're currently doing at this particular point in time. So, you know, say for example, it's out of season. Don't pick a picking process if you're out of season, but pick something that you do during this particular point in time of this year. So that might be some sort of crop maintenance that you might be working on. It could be a daily routine that you work on. Some maintenance routine that you do every single day. So pick something that you do at this particular point in time of year and just have a try of doing that process map and working through those 17 steps that I took you through today, and working a way through how you actually go into the detail of producing a process map. And then what we'll do next time is we'll review that. We'll set, like I said, we'll send this presentation out and the step-by-step guide, and then we'll review it to see how you've gone on and what problems you've had, and we can give you some hints and tips on how to overcome those particular issues. So at least that way we've got you to the stage where practically you're ready to do a process map when the season starts, and you've started to get some volumes going through that you can do some picking, and you can do some process mapping on the picking operations.